Well, there's a verse I want to go over today. We'll start with that. In the 11th chapter of the Gita, Krishna is displaying his universal form to Arjuna. And as Arjuna is mesmerized and terrified by that form simultaneously, Krishna speaks this verse. He says, Tasmat Tvam Utishta. Tasmat Tvam Utishta. Therefore you get up. Utishta is in the imperative. It means like do it now, like an instruction. It's called the imperative Sanskrit. Tasmat Tvam Utishta. It's called the imperative in language. When you're looking at the way verbs are conjugated, the imperative would be the equivalent in English of saying, if I said, stand up. In other languages, you change the suffix and it communicates that emotion that you practically in English you'd have to use increased volume to communicate. Did you follow that? So, and it's called conjugation. And in conjugation of verbs, you have different moods that you can conjugate a verb in. And so Sanskrit has those moods. They also are there in English, but a lot of times in English, the way you communicate as a mood is you increase your volume, and that's how you communicate it. Technically, if somebody says stand up, they're giving you an instruction, but it's a little bit more. It carries with it like a lot more weight. And Krishna rarely uses it in the Gita. He uses it here. He says Tasmat Tvam Utishta. Therefore, you get up. Yasho labhasva, gain fame. Punkte rajam samridham, enjoy a flourishing kingdom. Maya eva ete niyata purvam eva. They are already killed by me. All these have already been killed by me. Maya means by me. Ete, all these, all the kings on the battlefield. Niyata, they're already killed. Purvam, by me previously. I've already killed them all. Meaning that the outcome of the battle is already predetermined. Nimitta macham bhava sabya sachin. You be only an instrument. So the implication here, or not even the implication, what's being said is, I, God, have already preordained everybody's going to die, and you're going to be huh? Yes, Marka. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like what the appropriate term would be. I want to think of some poetic way of saying my coup de grace, or my instrument of death, or my sword of Damocles, or I was trying to think of different things I could say, but none of them came to like really communicate what I wanted to say. But I thought of Kal Chakra, but that's something you guys wouldn't be familiar with. And so I was trying to think of something in English that communicates the idea that someone's an instrument in the hands of God. They're the instrument of violence in the hands of God. Defenders of the faith was a term used by the Pope to describe the Jesuits. But I'm trying to think, there must be a term in English literature to communicate this idea. All you are drawing a blank as well, right?
I just think of Agent of Chaos.
Agent of Chaos doesn't work, obviously. Crusaders, sure, that was a group of people, yeah, but they didn't necessarily win. You could be a Knights Templar, a Crusader, Defender of the Faith, but it doesn't communicate it. Like the axe of justice, something like that, the sword of justice, something like that. And so Krishna's telling Arjuna that we're going to win, you're going to win, I've already determined everybody's going to die, and I'm going to kill them through you. You can just be my instrument. Does that make sense? Anyway, there's a bunch of fascinating stuff about the verse. There's the idea that, where does predetermination end and where does free will begin? How do you marry those two ideas together into a reasonable and coherent theology? That's a cool subject. There's the idea of violence being divinely ordained, and holy wars, and jihads. And is the Gita promoting a holy war, and how to shuck and jive and navigate through that without becoming lumped in with modern day jihadists, which are pretty much the definition of fanatic blind religion for most people. Not most people. Quarter of the world's population is Muslim. So for them, and you might think, as long as I'm in a tangent on this, you might think that most Muslims don't approve of jihad, right? Because that's certainly what you'll learn on HuffPost and Facebook and Instagram. But they did a poll, and 1/3 of Muslims are into jihad. So you figure we're looking at 1.5 to 2 billion people. 1/3 of them is somewhere between 500 and 650,000 people, 50 million people, excuse me. Essentially double the population of the U.S. of Muslims are into jihad. Even more than that are into killing people for leaving Islam and converting to another religion. That's getting more into the 700 million category. If you get into hudud, or cutting off the hands of thieves and cutting off the noses of thieves and stuff like that, the traditional stoning of adulteresses, that kind of stuff, the traditional Muslim punishments prescribed in Sharia, now you're up in the 850, 900 million category. And so the idea that most Muslims are moderate is just plainly untrue. Maybe most Muslims in the U.S. are moderate, but we're not a major Islamic country. Maybe I think we have 2-3 million Muslims. But if you actually look around the world and you look at the statistics, a very, very large percentage of Muslims, compared to what you might think, are okay with religious violence. And I mean, I think we're looking at more like 40% of Muslims believe that Sharia is for everybody, not Muslims. So now you're looking at somewhere between 600 and 800 million people who believe that Sharia is for everybody. Do you guys follow this? And that's not like an obscure Islamic belief. Dar al-Harb, or a house of war, is a place where the government is not Islamic. Like Turkey is Dar al-Harb. It's a place of war. Why? Because although the entire population is Muslim, well, few exceptions, but by and large, the entire population is Muslim. Christianity got knocked out of Turkey with the Ottoman Empire and never came back. The Eastern Church used to be located in Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul, and the Ottoman Empire took it over and then just never gave it back. But I mean, Christianity was huge in Turkey. Paul preached there. Antioch is in the same area. And so there's a huge Eastern Christian church there. The Western church was in Rome, but the Eastern church was in Istanbul. But the Muslims came in, they took it, they never gave it back. So although Turkey is almost a completely Muslim country, they have a secular government, and therefore pious Muslims consider it a house of war. And Dar al-Salam is a house of peace. A house of peace is where Muslims have taken the government and they've enforced Sharia law. So Spain, for instance, for 3-4 centuries, was Dar al-Salam. Salam means peace. That's where you get the word Islam from. And so Spain was a house of peace because the Muslims took the government and enforced Sharia law, and therefore they considered it to be like a good Muslim country. So the idea that Sharia is for everybody is there. It goes back to the first day of the Islamic calendar is not the day that Muhammad was born. It wasn't the day he first got his revelation from Allah. The first day of the Islamic calendar, day 1, year 1 for the Islamic calendar is?
When he conquered Mecca?
Nope. The day he sacked Medina. and established Sharia in Medina? Close.
Wrong Tennessee.
Yes. So, violence is woven into the very fabric of Islam, as is a system of governance which is enforced upon people irrespective of whether they accept it or not. And so although there are moderate Muslims, a moderate Islam is harder to find in the traditional texts. And normally, like with Jews and the Hebrew Bible, they've repudiated the teachings about slavery, which are in those texts. No one's repudiated and declared Muhammad was backwards. And so none of the four major schools of Islamic jurisprudence have ever declared that things shouldn't be the way they are in the Quran and the Hadith. And so you get moderate Muslims, but in terms of like an organized, massive school of Islam that doesn't promote Sharia, doesn't exist. In Sunni or Shia Islam. Did you guys follow that? Just to be a little controversial. So, there's the predestination versus free will. The verse seems to be pretty heavily leaning towards predestination. Of course, he says to Arjuna, you can only be my instrument, indicating that Arjuna has a choice, and therefore free will is also woven in the verse. Then you've got the holy war situation going on. And, you got to navigate that. I mean, could there ever be violence that God approves of? Interesting question. It's not really so complicated. If you have a hard time answering it, it's because you're too influenced by the left to think clearly. But if you think about it, if someone's being raped, would it be okay to use violence to protect them? Of course it would. And if you say no, how about someone who's being murdered and raped? How about a child who's being murdered and raped? How about 1 million children being murdered and raped? Let's just keep upping the ante until I get you to a place where every single child's being murdered and raped simultaneously for all time in the universe, and you're the only one who can stop it, and the only way you can stop it is by using violence. Would you do it?
Yes.
And so once you acknowledge that yes, you would do that, then it just becomes where that line of demarcation lies. But the principle that violence is sometimes justified and ordained and proper and true. When something is true and right and proper, it means it's divinely ordained ultimately. Because it means the universe is constructed where that's the appropriate moral course, which means you're saying that that is the right thing to do. And therefore, God or the creator of the universe would approve of that. You might not believe in God, so you have to get to a secular moral theory. But if you do believe in God, then God would support something which is moral and ethically correct. And therefore, if it is moral and ethically correct, which you guys just said it was, that means that God would approve it. Did you guys follow that? It's actually not that complicated. People just don't normally think about it. They get a little sexed up by Gandhi. And they, like this turn the other cheek thing. And that becomes like nifty. And they don't think it through. Even Gandhi, at a certain point, told Mountbatten, if you guys don't get out, post-World War II, I can't stop my people from rising up against you. It's actually the threat of a rebellion that got the British out of India, not any morality whatsoever. They were beleaguered and beat up from World War II, and India was raising a national army, which actually Hitler had helped with that. Hitler had sent the conscripted soldiers that were caught fighting for the British against their will back to Singapore, and they were trained in Malaysia and Singapore to fight in the Indian National Army and to get ready to fight the British. And the British were beat up post-World War II, and they were losing their empire left and right, and so they had to give up the crown jewel, and that's how India won its independence. It wasn't because they saw the moral thing to do, it was because they were weakened. Any God-fearing Indian who's studied even a little bit of Indian history knows this, right, Brudge? You know this, right? If you're raised in the West, you might not know, but if you were raised in India, you know this. So there's this idea of violence. Is violence ever appropriate? And the answer is a resounding yes. So free will's in the verse, and we just have an aesthetic where we don't like violence. We don't actually not believe in violence. Civilization is basically organized violence. You have an organized group of armed thugs who wander the streets. with better ammunition and better weapons than the criminals, and they punish you and potentially kill you if you disobey the rules. And that's what keeps people from breaking the rules. Do you guys follow that? The police force is a group of armed thugs with a license to kill who wander around with good equipment and fight, guerrilla gangs that don't have as good equipment. And it just keeps escalating. I remember when LA got taken down during the riots, and they were making organized attacks on the police stations, a few blocks down from us. They were burning down the Fedco, which is like a old school Costco, a few blocks down from us. They shot up the temple, rolling around, burning places down. And what do we do? I say we. I mean, what do the Hare Krishnas do? We blocked off the street and protected our community. But what did the government do? You guys know? 92 riots, Rodney King?
The military.
Yeah, they sent the National Guard. They had tanks on Pico Boulevard, the West Side Pavilion. There were tanks out in front of the West Side Pavilion. They brought in full-on tanks into LA. And you know what happened to that massive monster can't stop us, can't stop, won't stop rebellion? They pressed pause real quick. In India, you hire your chowkidars, you hire your guards from another state. Know why? Huh? They don't speak the language. They don't like the locals. Indians are super xenophobic and racist, even within the different states of India. You bring in people from an alternative state, they don't get along with anybody, and they can't be corrupted immediately. Give them 5 years, they learn the local language, and they get in there, and then you got to move a new crew in. They do the same thing in the military. That's why they move people every couple of years. Not because they're going to get corrupt and turn on the government, because they get comfortable and they start not doing their work. If you're always mixing them up and bringing in new stuff, they can never get their bearings and learn how to wire the system and get comfy. It keeps everybody on their toes all the time. They did some studies. They turned up the lights in a manufacturing plant, and everybody's production went up. So you know what they did next? They turned them up again. You know what happened? Everybody's production went up again. You know what they did next? They turned them up again. You know what happened? Everybody's production went up again. Then you know what they did? They turned them down. Guess what happened? Every section went up again. What was it? It was that they were being watched. And that people were changing things and watching them. And that's what freaked them out. Every time it changed things, they're like, we gotta double down. We know what's happening next. And they got more into it. And so that regular change, whether it's lights up, lights down, it doesn't matter. It's that people are watching you and making things happen. You hear, Leela?
Yeah.
You heard that?
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. That's what gets people working right. They're being watched. Big Brother's watching you. I don't know how I got into that tangent. I was going okay. I don't know how I got there. Anybody know how I got there? Yeah, it's that, I know that. I want to get from there to where I am right this second. Anybody? No, I talked about the chowkidars in India. I talked about the history of India. I talked about violence, getting rid of the British. And I talked about how you got to change up the chowkidars. It's a little tangent. I got in the military. I got into how it's even true in productivity. That's how I got there. You guys aren't paying attention. You're slipping. All right. So I don't want to focus on free will and predestination. I also don't want to focus on justice, violence being justified. What I want to focus on is that I think it's important to learn how to be violent. Not just for men, especially for men. Why do men especially need to know how to be violent? Because we lost the lactation battle. We don't get to get pregnant. We don't get to make babies. And so as a consolation prize, we get a larger amount of upper body strength compared to women. And a larger amount of upper body strength means you are better with your arms. And our arms are our primary means of conveying violence. You can kick. You do like a capoeira thing. But those guys never do too good in actual fights. Being able to use your arms. Women have roughly the same lower body strength, posterior chain strength as men. If they're weaker, it's usually because they're lighter weight. But when you get into upper body strength, women have just way higher fat content because of their breasts, and they also just have way less strength. If you look at top squatters amongst men and women in the same weight class, there's not so much difference. If you look at top bench pressers amongst men and women in the same weight class, it's like double. We got that dispensation. Upper body strength means an ability to commit violence. So it's especially true for men, but it's also important that women learn how to be violent. You know why? Because the world's violent. Jivo jivasya jivanam, one living entity is food for another. There's a law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. One of the problems with hunting is hunters go out and kill really nice animals, and then what happens? The weaker ones proliferate and they mess up the gene pool. That's already been proven with horned sheep and with elephants. You want the strongest animals to survive, the weakest ones to die out, and then the gene pool gets stronger. We live in a survival of the fittest world. We live in a violent world. You know what animals do we most closely resemble? Primates. Come on, guys. You awake? What's going on? You guys on point? You ready for this one? Facebook just had to make a massive apology. There was some black guys getting like hassled by the cops, and then Facebook came in with a suggestion from its AI that said, "Would you like to see more videos of primates?" Right? And then they had to make a big apology. Front page news on the HuffPost. Check it out. Just happened today. You know what I mean? So there you go. Anyway, so what do we most closely resemble? Whether you're black or white, what do we most closely resemble? We resemble primates. We do. Yeah. Primates have an alpha culture. Violence is used. They establish dominance. They move forward. You guys know who James Mattis is? General James Mattis? You know who he is, right, Howard? You know who he is. James Mattis has these Mattisisms. He just had all these super cool, terse, tight, pithy statements he made that just blew everybody's mind. One of his most famous ones is, be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everybody you meet. Now, I might just have taken that way too literally. But when I walk into a room, I think about how I'm going to prevail if things go south. That's the way I roll. I walk into a room, I don't like my back to be exposed. I move myself into a position where I don't have back exposure. Because if you expose your back, it's the ultimate flank move. Somebody has full access to your body, and you have absolutely no way to defend yourself. And your neck is exposed, which there's no way to build muscle on your neck. Who just got choked out by my kids? Yeah, my 11-year-old out-wrestled Shri, but Govind, who puts all you guys to shame, right, with his monster squat, Russ choked him out. He let Russ have his back. Once Russ had his back, it was done. Done deal. My 11-year-old, my prepubescent 11-year-old. So, can't let people flank you. You got to have your back in the corner. And you start thinking, who's who? Who am I going to hit first? How am I going to prevail? If it all goes south, who's going to be on my team, who's not? I'm probably the only one who thinks like this. I doubt it. I think there's probably at least like one more weirdo, violent, Rambo wannabe freak in the room. I'm not sure who it is, but there must be one of you out there. Raise your hands if you ever think like me. A few of you? Yeah. Howard, come on, why don't you raise your hand, you liar? You're sitting in the back with your back to the wall, doing literally what I just talked about. So, just to live in this world means there's a high probability at some point you're gonna have to deal with violence. And anyway, to deal with violence, to engage in skilled violence, to be able to use violence, to defend yourself, violence is always offensive. Also, if it's violence which is not against like a non-threat, it also has to be tactical and timed right. You have to make the right attack at the right time to defeat your opponent. And so violence is all about decisiveness and commitment and the willingness to strike first. It's like a common trope in mixed martial arts. Be first, in boxing as well. Be first. They mean dictate the pace of the fight, and don't just react to your opponent, but be first. Stick your jab, move, use your footwork, throw your kicks, measure the distance. Be first. It's a very, very common theme. Of course, there are counterpunchers whose whole... Floyd Mayweather is a classic counterpuncher. Not that that's his only tool in his toolbox, but that's what he likes to do. He likes to let you put him in a corner, and then you throw and you get frustrated. Mike Tyson used to be like that also, because he was short. And he had small arms, short arms. Not small like thin, but small like short. And so he was fighting against much larger opponents. So he had to bait them into punching them with his peekaboo style. You know Mike Tyson's famous peekaboo style that he learned from Customado? And so he would bait you in. And he'd squat. He had an incredible squat. He'd bait you in with his head movement and his squatting and take away your distance. Muhammad Ali did the same thing. Muhammad Ali would lean down. So you think you're jabbing at him, but you're actually punching downwards, which increases the distance you have to punch. And so he'd come at you like half bent over. And you didn't realize that you try to punch, but when you're way overextended, and then he counters you. So anyway, there's different theories about boxing and what's the best way to box. It depends on who you're fighting. There's different, there's like your brawler. Your brawler just comes at you and just throws heavy leather, like slugs at you. So what do? You got to get inside, because when you get inside, they're not as technical. They're used to throwing big, long shots, like overhands. You get inside and you beat them with uppercuts and jabs, with uppercuts and hooks, or elbows, or headbutts in close fighting. And then you get then those guys who fight in close, they're usually short. So what do you do against them? You properly box them, stick them with your jab over and over again. That's how Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield beat Mike Tyson. They just peppered him with their jab and destroyed him, and he couldn't get past it. They had a really good jab. And then for those really good boxers who are really good and have really good form, what do? You brawl them. You walk in on them, eat a couple shots, and hit them with a big monster overhand. They're too much like a gentleman James. They're too much on the fence with you. And so you come in and hit them with a sledgehammer over the head, and that wins the fight. So you got to learn 2 boxing styles, because there's 3 different types of fighters, and not every style can be beaten by one. So if you're a brawler and you come across an infighter, you won't be able to beat him. So you're going to be a brawler and a straight fighter, or a brawler and an infighter. So no matter who you go up against, you have a style that can beat them. If you watch Floyd Mayweather, he'd use his techniques. If a guy was better than him, he'd switch his game up right in the middle of his game. How do you get good at this? You do it. You do it. Bernardo Fares, a jiu-jitsu world champion a few years ago, like the nicest guy in grappling. He said, I like jiu-jitsu because when you get on the mat, there's no more fake. You find out really quick who's who. But that's actually true for any, he said like jiu-jitsu is different. That's actually, maybe it's not true for like kung fu or something like that, but it is actually true for boxing and wrestling and jiu-jitsu and any serious combat art, knife fighting, gunplay, anything you get into. It's very quickly you find out who's who if you get into that universe with the people who are adept at it. Most of us don't ever want to be in a situation where you have to use violence, but if you don't put yourself in that situation voluntarily in training and get used to pulling the trigger, then when it comes time to be decisive and make that commitment, you won't be able to. Or you'll make it real sloppy and kind of throw yourself like a moth into a flame. So although I personally think everybody should learn how to be violent, and I think small people should learn how to use a knife, and every small person should carry a knife, because if you're small and you carry a knife, guess what you just became? You became the biggest dude in the room. The biggest, baddest mofo in the room. Pardon my French. If you carry a knife. It's like It's easy to carry. People don't carry guns. Everybody will carry a knife. And if you carry a knife and you know how to use it, you're the scariest person I've ever met. I'm running from you. I got like a 4 foot, like my kid's like 4'9" or 4'10", 100 pounds with a knife. I'm out the door. I'm running for the hills. Do not want any of that. I do think it's valuable. I do think violence is valuable and people should learn how to be violent. But that's not what I want to talk about tonight. This is all just an intro. Here's what I want to talk about tonight. I think we all need to learn how to commit to Krishna, to our spiritual life, to our vows, to our principles, to our integrity. In a lot of ways, I don't see this as being any different than learning how to commit to violence. You have to put yourself into difficult situations. You have to train for it when it actually comes down. And if you haven't trained for it, you're going to fail. You need to sculpt your life where you can get good at committing to Krishna when it counts, so that when it does actually count and it goes down and you got to like make a move and decide what's important to you and what's valuable and what comes first and what you're tethered to and what your principles are and what you live by, you don't get seduced by the dark side. You keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. And I think in the broadest sense, that's what Krishna is talking about with Arjuna. We all have something amazing to do in this world. We can make a difference in people's lives. Mothers can make a difference in their kids' life without ever leaving the home. Or if you're a stay-at-home dad, you can do the same thing. I think most of us are meant for more than just, like in an Amish style, raising our spawn and our faith. I think most of us are capable of a whole lot more. Changing the world, making the world a better place, making a difference in people's lives. I think most of us have that as our destiny, just like Arjuna had his destiny. That's my boilerplate template for everybody in the room today. Your destiny is to help people come to spiritual life, help people become spiritually enlightened, help people appreciate, take advantage of, become inspired by the very thing that's inspiring and mobilizing and animating you. Do you guys follow that? It's like you guys are all ready. I know you're interested in spiritual life because it's Saturday night and you're hanging out here. So then what's your destiny? It's real simple. I'll give it to you. Here it is. Your destiny is to help other people come to spiritual life. And each one of you is uniquely empowered to do that some way. And it's not even straightforward. Like if you ask me, Braj Kamud, guy right here, raise your hand, Braj Kamud. Braj Kamud is like the most Indian dude I know. He's like, if you look up fob in the dictionary, there's a picture of Braj Kamud. Somehow or other, Braj Kamud is super sexy to Americans on the college campus. They think it's the coolest thing since sliced bread, and he inspires and guides a lot of people. Right, Eric? It's far out. I don't know how it happens, but it happens. I can't see it. I'm like, come on, really? But what do I know? Obviously, I don't know much. And so, a lot of what I do is get on people's cases to get their act together, which means I have to find fault with them and critique them. That's my service, is to clean them up so that when it really comes down, they can perform. I also try to fan the spark and see what people's potential is. But I don't always see it. Like I know how to clean people up, but then what they turn into when they blossom oftentimes surprises me. Sometimes I see it, like I told you were a counselor, and you're like, no, really? And now people keep calling you to counsel them, right? So sometimes I see it, and I'm, sometimes I stop clock is right twice a day. Sometimes I get it right. But I'm oftentimes surprised by how people are empowered to change the world. But the boilerplate is all of you are engaged in self-realization, and therefore the way you're going to change the world is by engaging other people in self-realization, helping them to take advantage of the thing which is so inspiring to you. It's simple, right? I'm not forcing that down your throat. I mean, obviously, if it's your first time ever here, I'm not talking to you. But the people who come here on a regular basis, who are practicing our tradition already, or even some other tradition. Maybe you like hanging out with us and you go become a Buddhist, or you go do Buddhism on the side. You just like, don't tell us, whatever. But irrespective of that, if you're coming here, that means you're into spirituality. However that spirituality manifests in your daily life, at least you're going to want to share that with people. Why wouldn't you? Why would you want to keep that all to yourself and not share it with people? You discover the panacea or the touchstone or the universal solvent or the elixir of immortality, the cure for cancer. Why wouldn't you share that with the world? What's wrong with you if you don't share that? So we might not all need to pick up a knife or learn how to scrap, although I actually think everybody should, because the world's a dangerous, violent place. And if you learn how not to be prey, you're in a much better position. You'll be more confident. You'll walk into a room more confident. You'll be able to speak to people with a lot more authority. People will respect you a lot more naturally. And if ever you unfortunately come into a situation where violence is on the horizon, you'll see it coming from some distance. You'll be able to prep, and most importantly, you'll be able to get off first. Whatever that looks like. Running, kicking someone in the groin, whatever it is, you'll be able to get off first because you'll have learned how to pull the trigger. Nobody learns how to pull the trigger in the first fight. Fight, flight, or freeze. You end up freezing, freaking out. Plus, even you don't freeze, your peripheral vision goes to hell, and you can't think straight, and you lose like half your technique, and you're just like gassing yourself out and making a fool out of yourself, making all the wrong moves. But if you prep for it ahead of time, then when that moment of truth comes, you at least got a fighting chance. Because those predators coming after you, they've been prepping for that moment of truth. They're taking advantage of the idea that they're better in that moment of truth than you are. It's going to give them an advantage. Going to give them an angle. Going to give them a tactical advantage. You guys following this? So I do think everybody should learn violence. However, even more important than that is that you learn how to pull the trigger and commit to Krishna, to your spiritual life, and you become an instrument of changing people's life by that commitment. It's a far out thing, but by the very act of committing in your own life, you become empowered to help others, because even if you don't say a word, they see your commitment, and that speaks most powerfully. That's why we have all those kitschy cliches like, your actions speak so loud I can't hear what you're saying, example is better than precept, step up or shut up, walk your talk. All those cliche sayings are there because they're all true. Cliches are cliches because everybody believes them and says them. If you're committed to your spiritual life, if you chant your japa every day, if you follow all 4 regular principles strictly, if you conduct your life with integrity, and everybody you meet who spends more than 2 seconds with you will see that, and they'll be attracted by it, they'll be inspired by it, they'll be in awe of it, and it'll open the door, the window of hope in their own heart that maybe they could do the same thing. Having integrity. And what does having integrity mean? It means committing to your values. Integrity is from integer. It means you're whole. It means that your values and your lifestyle match up. So what's the cornerstone of integrity? It's committing to your values. So much so that you actually practice them. Obviously, a full lecture would involve us in determining how to arrive at values, and we talk about rigorous honesty and other stuff, try to establish some kind of collective set of values, and then you have integrity by following them. I don't want to do that today. I just want to talk about the value of commitment. When you find truth, when you find something worth committing to, learn to commit to it. Because at some point in life, if you've learned that art of commitment, then it'll go off and something will happen to challenge that commitment. You won't be expecting it. It'll be like a sudden surprise attack by a predator. But instead of being a physical attack on your body, it will be an attack on your integrity. Something seductive will come along. Some easy money, some cheap fame, some cheap accolade. You follow? Something sexy and seductive will come along. And if you've learned how to commit in times of peace, if you've prepared for war in times of peace, like, everybody used to get injured during training. It still happens, but it used to be savage. We would train so hard for fights that by the time the fight rolled around, like half of us were like injured and couldn't fight. And then finally somebody was like, hey, you gotta like train a little more strategically. Otherwise everybody gets injured and they don't get paid for fighting. And then like the whole mood shifted around like 2005, 2007, MMA, everybody started training a little bit more chill, where they weren't getting concussed in training all the time. And then people started making it for their fights better. But you got to train hard. That way by the time the fight rolls around, it's nothing you haven't seen before. Your opponent doesn't come at you with anything you haven't seen. You're ready for whatever comes at you. You can train that. You can engineer that. But it happens in times of peace. You prepare for war in times of peace. And so using that same metaphor, we should prepare to have our integrity tested when things are good. We should learn the art of commitment when things are good. When we're surrounded by the devotees, we should learn that art of committing. They're showing us, they're modeling it for us. And then we're learning to commit. And we fail, and they bring us back and pick us back up and give us another opportunity. And then we learn how to commit. We gradually become really good at the lost art and science of how to make a spiritual commitment and keep it. And then when life comes around and throws some seductive thing our way that would normally knock us off our game, we've trained ourselves to pass that open window, to pull the trigger on our integrity, to be decisive, to be first. You guys following this? Like somebody called me today, newly sober, and they're like, hey, remember that old job I used to have that drove me to drink, the one that paid real well? And they said, I'm thinking about maybe going back to that old job I had. Now I'm sober for the first time in 10 years. I think we're going back to that place I described to you was responsible for me drinking and using drugs in the first place. You guys follow me? And I blew a gasket and flipped out. I was getting ready to work out, and I stopped my workout, called reinforcements, and got an intervention group on the phone just because the idea was broached to me. I freaked out and explained like in 52 different ways how this was the worst idea I'd ever heard in my entire life, and how I was intensely disturbed that they would have such a thought, and how this was the beginning of the end, and the end was nigh, and the harbinger of death was just around the corner. Now I'm using all my poeticisms. Now like I'm firing on all cylinders. Because I got access to this person's a time of peace, and they're having that stupid idea, and I can nip that in the bud. Keep somebody on the straight and narrow so they can learn how to think clearly. I can model it for them now, and then when life comes along and I'm dead and gone or I'm not around, they're going to be able to think on their feet. We want to learn the art of taking good counsel, of making commitments, of picking ourselves back and dusting ourselves off and trying again, of not giving up, of seeing the way forward, of navigating life, of being good men and women. We want to do that now. And then when life throws you a curveball, you've seen it. You've prepped for that. You're waiting. Like a dog. They have these dogs they train to recognize drugs being brought over on planes. But nobody brings drugs over on planes anymore because everybody gets caught. It's not like it was in the 70s and 80s where you could carry drugs on the plane. I used to travel with drugs on the plane. It was like no big deal. It's like nothing. It's like no hassle. But nowadays, like they got dogs, and it's like they're on it, like white on rice, right? And so those dogs get bummed out because they're trained to smell just the tiniest amount of drugs. There's a guy who could smell like a dog. They brought him into a room with hundreds of books, and they put a little tiny fold of cocaine in between the pages of one of the books like hundreds of books in a room. And he walked in the room and sniffed around in the room and found the book. Oh, it was like a real life superhero, like a superlative olfactory sense equivalent to that of a trained drug dog. That's the test for the drug dog. They subjected a human being to the drug dog test. The dude walked around the room and went to the book and opened it up and found it. I was just could not believe it. Stan, what's the guy's name? Marvel Comics? Stan Lee. It was Stan Lee's series, real life superhero series. Check it out on Netflix. Instead of watching Game of Thrones or stuff you guys are watching, watch something educational. So, those dogs get depressed. And so what they have to do every few days is they'll purposefully bring some drugs in a bag and let the dogs find it, and give them some Scooby snacks and make them feel good about themselves because they've been trained for it. And so when it never happens, they actually get depressed. We need to be like that. It's real simple. You chant your japa every day and pray to Krishna from the core of your heart that you never fall down, you never leave, and he lets you see a smiling face. You tell him over and over again, that's the only thing that matters in life. He can take all the money, take all the fame, take all the accolade, give it to other people, as long as he lets you see a smiling face. As long as he lets you keep your vows. As long as he lets you make your elders proud. You make that prayer from the core of your heart every day when you pick up your japa bag, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, for the rest of your life. And then when nonsense comes along and something comes along to break your faith, it won't. It'll just solidify it. And you glide through life on a hovercraft. Nothing will take you down. And if you trip, you won't even fall. Krishna won't even let you fall. You'll trip and stumble, and he'll save you. Bhakti is that powerful. Even you run forward with your eyes closed, Krishna won't let you fall. But you got to actually be a bhakta. And what's a bhakta? Somebody who, in the core of their heart, every day cries out to Krishna with great longing and absolute sincerity, please let me stay. Please let me serve. Please don't kick me away from your reddish lotus feet. Please allow me to serve forever. Please don't ever push me away. Please let me see you. And so when I read a verse like this, a verse about skilled violence, a verse about destiny, a verse about a martial culture, because the Gita was definitely spoken in a martial context. So many verses in the Gita. Yoga kshemam baham yaham. I carry you what you lack and preserve what you have. That's a secondary meaning. The primary meaning is I carry you in times of war and peace. Yoga and kshema in original Vedic Sanskrit means war and peace. Kshema is peace and yoga is war, because in time of yoga you join your chariot to the horse and ride out into battle. And so the context of the entire Gita is in a martial milieu. And those verses speak to me. They speak to me because I'm a violent man, because I got the consolation prize of upper body strength, and because I was raised that violence was a destination, not just part of the journey. It was something to be cultivated. It had value. My father raised me like that. His father raised him like that. The people I hung out with taught me to be like that. My circumstances taught me that. Things that happened in my early life taught me that. It all conspired together and taught me that violence was worth cultivating. Learning how to be skilled at violence, learning how to get off first and prepping for it ahead of time had value. However, when I read these verses, 1 billion times more, they speak to me about the value of commitment to your spiritual values. The importance of commitment to your spiritual values. The importance of finding truth and then marrying yourself to it, tethering yourself to it, being a slave of truth, letting that seep into your bones, not aspiring for being anything else. And so when I read a verse like this, as much as I'm attracted to the martial nature of it, even more so I'm attracted to the really radical, subversive, otherworldly, transcendental commitment that it's espousing. Get up. Don't give up. Get up. Move forward. You have something amazing to do in your life. You're going to help a lot of people. You need to be good now so you're prepped to help so many people. You have people you haven't even met before who are going to be inspired by you. And they're going to be inspired by the fact that you're making the right decisions now, today, in your life, right now. Don't be lazy. Don't be stupid. Don't be weak. Now's the time. You're in the company of devotees. Things are okay. Now's the time to learn the lost art and science of how to be a man of integrity, how to be a soul of integrity, how to do the right thing. Life is not always going to be this easy. You're going to get old and it's going to suck. I mean, think about what's death. Death is staying in your body gets so painful you'd rather die than stick around. You follow? You watch people die, they give up. It's just too painful. Staying in their body, keeping their heartbeat, it's just too painful. It's not that they're holding on to the last breath. They are, but then they let go. You watch it. You watch people. If you ever watch people wind down and die, it's like they give up. It's like too painful to stay in their body anymore. They let go and move on. Your voice is going to be choked up with phlegm. Everything's going to be disturbed. Your heart's going to have a hard time beating. You're not going to be able to breathe. You're going to have to think of Krishna in that moment. Better we take all these moments now where we're young, we're strong, our mind has the ability to focus. Just deal with your senses. Learn how to deal with your senses. Are they saying crack-ho? Crack-ho. I thought it was me. I'm like, oh man, like what's wrong with me? People walking down the street, they're saying like cheerio, and I'm hearing crack-ho. Like what's wrong with me? They're like, hi-ho, hi-ho. It's off to work I go. And I'm like, crack-ho, crack-ho. Some kind of like retro Dave Chappelle skit. Before he got woke. What was the point I was making?
Your body just decays on you.
Yeah. You got to control your senses. It's pretty simple. People have really two basic problems in life. You know what they are? Sex and drugs. That's pretty much it. Most of you don't have a drug problem. I mean, there might be some of you who are still using drugs. I don't know. But most of you don't have a drug problem because we usually nip that stuff in the bud real quick. No pun intended. And so, most of you have a what problem? Sex. What kind of problem you got, Mason? Most of you have a sex problem. You got to control your senses and learn how not to be victimized by them. You want to have sex? No problem. Got an easy program for you. You want to have sex? You know what it is? It sure as hell ain't masturbation. You know what it is? Get married. Make a lifelong commitment to one person. And then have children. And then spend your life cleaning their diapers. Feeding them. only to have them reject you in puberty and learn detachment. We got a program for you. But man, it's rough. You guys are like in your early 20s, and we're expecting you to be celibate. That's tough to do, right? Right? Like, who can do that, right? I'm like 49. It's like I could sit up here on my big pulpit, on my pedestal, my hellfire and brimstone lecture, and talk to you guys about how to be chaste. But I mean, like, you know, I'm not in your shoes, right? I was stone cold celibate from the age of 16 to 25 when I got married. I'm running laps around all of you guys. You think you got it rough at 21? I'd already been celibate for 5 years by the time I was 21. Fully celibate, no masturbation, 100% celibate, living solid, taking cold bath, doing the right thing. You think you got it rough? You don't even know what rough is. You got it easy. It's getting spoon-fed to you. I had to fight for it. You feel that? That's what integrity buys you. You live with integrity, and you can tell people what time it is, and they got to listen because you've been there. Viktor Frankl tells you that nothing in life can take away your freedom to choose how you wish to respond, and every experience can make you grow. And you're like, you don't know what I've been through. He's like, yeah, you're right. Like, what's your life like? So I went to Auschwitz, lost my entire family. And everybody's like, oh. If you live with integrity, no matter what you're doing now, if today you decide I'm going to start living with integrity, I'm going to chant my rounds, I'm going to follow the principles, I'm going to be a good person, I'm going to make the right decision, I'm going to take the high road, take the road less traveled, I'm going to step up. Today, you decide that, and you start to build a powerful, empowered fire within you, which will be able to illuminate and give warmth to those around you. There is no other way. To quote the Mandalorian, that is the way. You step up, you have integrity, you follow your vows, find truth, and then marry it. Make Krishna the most important thing in your life. Make the right decision. You'll have a wonderful life, an adventurous life, filled with miracles so far beyond anything you ever could have imagined in your wildest dreams. There's like so much beauty, so much love, so much sweetness, so much mercy just around the corner, but you're too busy looking at the gutter and so you can't see what's just right around the corner waiting for you. So I hear a verse like this. Krishna says, get up. I've got a plan for you. Step into it. Be my instrument. Be amazing. Live a life of integrity. Inspire others. I've already got it organized for you, better than you could ever imagine. Get in the current of divinity, and I'll carry you home. When I hear verses like this, although I appreciate the martial nature of them, I appreciate that broader understanding infinitely more. It speaks to me much louder and much more powerfully. Okay, so I was thinking of my way up. With 6 seconds to spare, thank you guys very much. Let's do a look here time.